Actual retail price, $19.
$9.99.
$19.99.
Nine?
Why do so many prices end in nines? You can get an apple for 69 cents or maybe even this canoe for $8.99.99. I know when I see this price, it takes me a second to realize the trick. Initially, I only see that number that's on the left. My brain thinks, oh nice, a canoe for only $800. But in reality, and I know you know this, it's only a penny away from $900. And this is actually closer to $1,000 once you account for other fees like tax and shipping. But here I am thinking that I got this incredible deal. This sort of pricing falls under the umbrella term of psychological pricing, which takes advantage of how we recognize prices. And in a university study from 2021, it was found that retail sales increased by 60% when implementing psychological pricing. Plus, retailers who have done away with this pricing have even failed completely, but more on that in a minute. It's no wonder that software companies do it too. Even titans like Zoom end their prices in 9. But there's something at play here that doesn't quite add up to a whole number. It undeniably helps when you end your prices in 9s with acquisition, especially in retail. But companies with prices that end in 9s are suffering from worse retention than those that end in 0 or 5. So in order to fully understand this growth hack for what it is, let's look at its history. And we're gonna have to go back. Legend has it that in 1876, Melville E. Stone was selling the first penny paper, the Chicago Daily News. At the time, nickel papers were all the rage, and you'd think that undercutting the price by 4 cents would win out, right? Not exactly. Pennies weren't widely in circulation, and with no sales tax, charging on the whole dollar was much more common. There was an opportunity, however. Melville was able to convince merchants that employee theft could be reduced if they lowered the price of goods by a penny, charging 99 cents instead of $1. By doing so, workers would have to open the cash register for more transactions in order to make change. It worked, and the Chicago Daily News began to see momentum. But then, merchants began running out of pennies. No worries though, Melville just went to Philadelphia and purchased a bunch of barrels of pennies from the mint directly. He solved penny circulation himself. This is one of the first rumored instances of ending prices in 9s. I mean, folks figured that they might as well buy a paper since their transaction wasn't even a full dollar. They were rich, a whole penny. But the real reasoning might not be as concrete and poetic. It's much more likely the result of just a gradual change in the early 1900s as advertising blossomed and competition grew. You can actually see the change happen over time when looking at newspapers. If we start in 1919, it was still a lot more common to see prices ending in a 5 or a 0. But when looking at newspapers just 5 years later, more 9s began cropping up. And 10 years after that and so on, you get the idea. By 1997, 60% of all advertising included price points with some form of price ending in a 9. But what happens when businesses try to leave the cult of 9? Well, in 2012, JCPenney owner Ron Johnson decided to change up the retail behemoth's approach to pricing. In an effort to be more honest, JCPenney rolled out their Everyday Price initiative. The idea was to rally behind transparent pricing, and that meant putting an end to 9s and replacing them with 0s and 5s. Customers love honesty, right? Well, money talks, and the strategy flopped immediately. JCPenney lost $3.3 million within the first year of the initiative. After their sales plummeted even more the following year, Johnson announced that they were moving away from their new pricing strategy and reinstating the age-old 9.9s that worked for years. But the damage was already done. JCPenney never totally recovered from the pricing blunder, and with COVID decimating them even further, they filed for bankruptcy in 2020. Psychologists Manoj Thomas and Vicki Morwitz proposed their theory as to why customers gravitate towards that first number. They coined their term the left-digit effect. It was their theory that we're overestimating the impact of the leftmost digit in a price. Remember in the beginning when I was talking about how I was only seeing that first number in the price of a canoe? Well, me and many other canoe enthusiasts feel like we're getting a deal. But because it's not actually a discount, when I show up to buy another canoe next month, I've already experienced the value of the product, and I've come to understand that the price I paid is not in fact a discount. I'm likely not going to make the same purchase again. We actually have some data that backs this up. It's a tactic that works better for products on the inexpensive side. We found those companies with a lower price point that ended their prices in 9s had up to 22% better conversion rates than those ending in 0s or 5s. But the more expensive the product gets, the worse the conversion rates became in comparison. The reason that this works for retailers is because I'm not actually buying a canoe every single month. I may only buy one canoe one time. But with a subscription, you've got to deliver canoe value over and over again. A subscription company needs to be focused on acquiring customers and then maintaining a relationship with those customers to keep them subscribed. Your value doesn't necessarily need to keep increasing forever and ever exponentially, but it does need to increase enough to meet the expectations of that regular price point. I mean, if you don't make any improvements to your product, then why am I going to buy your product the next month? In a study of over 1,000 subscription companies, we found that customers who converted based on a 9 price had worse retention than those who converted with a 0 or 5 price. Most likely, this is due to the perceived discount of the price. Going beyond just 9s though, we know that customers acquired via discounted pricing have a far higher churn rate than those who are offered no discount. When you preach a pay for exactly what you want mentality and lower the price through a discount, you're actually lowering the value of your product in your customers' eyes. So it's absolutely crazy for me to sit here and tell you that ending your pricing in 9s is a bad idea and you're bad and you should feel bad. You're not bad, you're good, you're great even. Clearly this works to get folks in the door, and the titans of SaaS continue to price this way, and their bottom line is not shrinking. I'm underscoring its significance not because of what it is, but because of what it isn't. Ending your prices in 9s is not a pricing strategy. Without a pricing strategy based on the actual value of your product, you aren't delivering what your customers want, and you're not going to lock them in for the long haul. The only pricing strategy that does this is value-based pricing.
I'm Vivian. I'm a pricing strategist on the Price Intelligently team. We have worked with literally hundreds of SaaS companies. Value-based pricing is essentially setting your pricing based off of what your customers are willing to pay. It's much more focused on your customer and your product.
And we know that the more successful a company is, the more likely they're using a value-based pricing model. You can see here that 45% of companies with ARR north of $500 million are utilizing it, compared to only 20% of companies with around $1 million in ARR. So here's a brief overview of how to price your product based on value. At the core of value-based pricing is a value metric. A value metric is not only how much you charge, but what you're charging for. This could be per seat, per gigabyte of storage, per canoe. All right, I'm getting out of the canoe, I promise. Once you've got your value metric, next you're going to want to do some research. Doing this research properly will help you avoid getting answers where people just tell you, just give it to me as cheap as possible. First, start by collecting data on your customer base, who they are and what they get out of your product. Then use this data to determine your price point.
We're setting a price range based off of what is realistic in the space, kind of things that you've done in the past. It's not as simple as just like, here's a bunch of prices, like I'll pick the lowest one.
You're going to want to ask questions like, at what price would this be too low that you would question the value of the product, as well as what price would be too high? Then figure out folks' relative preference of what they want from a product. This is a survey that basically asks potential customers, what is the one thing that you couldn't live without and the one thing you could?
Relative preference is really important because people don't really know how to prioritize the pretty neutral options. You are basically forcing respondents to make a trade-off.
Mapping all of this data onto a value matrix will help you understand what your core features are, as well as those that might just be add-ons, and ones that you might not actually need. And if you repeat this process on a quarterly basis, which we recommend, how customers perceive your product will be crystal clear. Once you've figured out value-based pricing, you're doing more than just getting folks in the door by charming them with a 9. And look, you might end up with a 9-based pricing after all, but you're focused on retaining them through an honest exchange of value.
If their only strategy is pricing in 9s, then yes, to your point, it's pretty rudimentary. Otherwise, I think it's relatively table stakes. Like, I don't think it really moves the needle one way or another.
I'm skimming over a lot of information here about value-based pricing. I'm by no means an expert, but the Price Intelligently team is, and they wrote a holistic guide on how to approach it. So the next thing you should do is check that out to learn it all.